Jimmy Carter made enemies, then peace. Ask Ford, Kennedy, Clinton. During the bruising 1976 presidential campaign, Jimmy Carter called President Gerald Ford incompetent and his policies morally and politically and intellectually bankrupt. But after Carter, a Democrat, unseated the Republican incumbent in a close race, he praised Ford in his inaugural address. "For myself and for our nation, I want to thank my predecessor for all he has done to heal our land." Carter's gracious words prompted a standing ovation for his recent rival. The two men worked together on Carter's transition to power and began speaking regularly about issues, including reviving the economy and ratifying the Panama Canal Treaty. In time, they became exceptionally close friends. Carter did not make peace with every political opponent, most notably Ronald Reagan, the Republican who defeated him in 1980 and went on to dismantle many Carter policies, including environmental efforts to reduce the nation's reliance on gas and oil. But to a degree rarely seen in modern politics, Carter was determined throughout his life to reconcile with many of his political adversaries, not just Ford, for instance, but also Senator Edward M. Kennedy, his most famous foe, who challenged him for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1980. Sometimes Carter mended fences quickly, as with Ford. In other instances, time softened hard feelings. It was only relatively recently that he reached out to former President Bill Clinton to warm relations that had been chilled for 40 years. Carter was complicated, a humble peacemaker as well as self-confident competitor. While other presidents tend to quietly cede the spotlight once they leave office, Carter did not, creating uneasy relations with most of the 7 presidents elected after him. The uncelebrity president, Jimmy Carter shuns riches, lives modestly in his Georgia hometown. Carter wanted to be the one who says inconvenient truths that anger all the other ex-presidents, said presidential historian Michael Beschloss. A competitor who wanted to be number one and a politician who remembered those who crossed him, Carter was also a Baptist Sunday school teacher who believed in forgiveness and that there was good in everyone. "This is one of the most interesting paradoxes about Carter," Beschloss said. "He had very fierce feelings about people, but at the same time, he did like to reconcile. At least in my life experience, you don't find both of those tendencies so intensely in the same person." In recent years, Carter spoke about how politics was dividing Americans, and he seemed more determined to attend to his own personal rifts, one at a time. Carter and Ford, the closest bond. Carter was proud of his unlikely friendship with Ford and described it as the closest bond between any 2 former presidents. The 2 former presidents made a pact that the one who lived longer would speak at the other's funeral, according to Richard Norton Smith, author of a Ford biography. When Ford died in 2006, Carter stood in front of Ford's flag-draped casket in a Michigan church and talked about what he and his former rival shared in common. They had both served in the Navy, married strong women, raised 3 sons and a daughter, and were committed to their religious faith and public service. And, he quipped, "We both enjoyed our unexpected promotion to Commander-in-Chief." Ford had helped Carter build a relationship with Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. So after Carter mediated the Camp David peace accords with Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem begin in 1978, the president made only one call from Marine One during the helicopter ride from Camp David to the White House. He phoned Ford. It was a nod to the credit he was due, said Norton Smith. After Sadat was assassinated in 1981, it was on the 16-hour flight back to the United States from his funeral in Egypt that Ford and Carter really set aside past slights and became friends. Together, they began working on hunger, electoral reform, and 24 other projects. Their wives became exceptionally close as well, and collaborated on mental health and addiction issues. "The 4 of us learned to love each other," Carter said at Ford's funeral, as Betty Ford nodded and Rosalind Carter dabbed tears from her eyes. Reflecting on their friendship, Ron Nessen, Ford's White House press secretary, said in a 2023 interview, "It's pretty amazing when you consider politics these days. Now there is so much anger and dislike among politicians. In those days, it was a little nicer."